My name is Jo Pullin, and I work on the Conservation Communities Project. Many of you will have already heard of this from previous talks and presentations that we've done. The Conservation Communities Project is a 2-year project which finishes in December 2022, so that's this year. And it's a very small project area working with communities in just 11 parishes from Hatherleigh up to Great Torrington. And the idea is that we encourage those communities to record as much about wildlife as they can and send their records in to the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre. And by doing that, we want to generate some brilliant data about the wildlife that's actually within those parishes, with the idea of rewriting the parish biodiversity audits. And to do that, we have been running a whole host of events on different wildlife topics so that people can improve their identification skills and feel more confident about recording the wildlife. We're also trying to help people improve their biodiversity in their parishes, and we're trying to get people to share the skills that they have. So with this project, although it's focused on those 11 parishes, we welcome people from all over Devon, and even with some of these online talks from all around the world, to join in and just get involved. So if you happen to live in Devon and like to record wildlife, or we're inspiring you to perhaps record some wildlife, please send in your records. It doesn't just have to be for these 11 parishes, but this project just happens to be funded to cover those parishes. So we need to thank the lottery for funding us for this project. And we're working very closely with the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, which is why Jess has offered to come along this evening and talk to us about butterflies. If you do happen to live in one of the parishes listed in the project, you are welcome to borrow one of our trail cameras and record some of the wildlife, perhaps in your garden or a piece of land that you own. So do get in touch with me. My email address is on the bottom there. So if you want to jot that down, you can get in touch with me to borrow the camera or to find out about other events that I'm running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Jess. I'm going to say thanks, Jess, for coming along this evening to talk to us about butterflies. And I can't wait to see what we've got in this area and what we need to brush our skills up on for identification. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you very much, Jo. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and you can all hear me all right. So yes, thank you very much for joining us tonight to talk about butterflies, and I'm particularly going to be talking about butterflies within the conservation communities area. But obviously when it comes to recording, although we're focusing on this area, if you live outside these parishes, then do send us your records in as well. So Jo's already introduced the project. So we are running until autumn this year. So we've got this summer to send in your records, and that's going to, obviously I'm focusing on butterflies tonight, but all your records, if you can send them in over the summer, we can pop them in the parish audits that we're going to be writing in autumn. So yes, thank you to our funders, and here's a little map of the parishes. So you can see you can tell where the river is. It'll be this very wiggly line down the middle. So that's the Torridge down the centre of these parishes. And we've got parishes there that are different sizes. So we've got sort of Hatherleigh, which is quite large, down to Hewish, which is probably, I think it's the smallest. But we'll be looking at the wildlife in all of those through the project. So on to butterflies. And the first question, what is a butterfly? I think that most of us know this. My daughter's only 2, and this is what she was learning at nursery just today, actually. It's an insect, 6 legs. The caterpillars also have 6 legs. They have 6 legs kind of at the front, and they've got some prolegs as well, so that's why it looks like they have more. They're not real legs, they're just there to help with the mobility. Multiple life stages. Obviously egg, caterpillar, pupa and adult. 2 pairs of wings, all covered in microscopic scales, and they're those microscopic scales that give butterflies the beautiful colours that they can have. And you can always tell when a butterfly is sort of newly hatched out of the pupa, because it's so shiny and lovely, and you can see that as they sort of age, the scales get sort of rubbed off and disturbed, and they start to look a little bit older. Most of them are nectar feeding, and we think that they probably evolved about 150 million years ago, so they have been around for a long time. Which makes sense that worldwide And I can't remember, I'm afraid, if this is butterflies and moths, which sort of feels maybe more right. Over 250,000 species are just made of butterflies and moths. So that's about a quarter of all the named species in the whole world. So I love facts like that. We only have 59 species in the UK. So that includes our resident species, and then there's a few who are migratory. So they actually spend the winters in Africa or Asia, and these tiny little insects kind of fly all the way across Europe, over the Channel, and back to summer in Devon, some of them. Lucky them. So butterfly or moth. So these are general rules. There are obviously going to be exceptions, but generally a butterfly is active by day, excuse me, and a moth active at night. So that is our sort of primary distinction that we learn when we're really tiny, the difference. If you look a bit closer, butterflies have got these clubbed antennae. So they're sort of thin antennae that come out and they've got a little kind of blob on the end. Whereas moths don't have that little blob on the end. And a lot of the moths, the males, have those lovely big feathery antennae that you see that butterflies just don't have. Again, another general rule, when butterflies land, they often put their wings up, they close them together and hold them up when they're at rest, whereas most moths do rest with their wings out, sort of flattened. Day flying butterflies are typically very colourful, whereas the moths, I didn't like to use the word drab, but there are quite a lot of small brown moths that are, well, to the untrained eye, not very easy to distinguish from each other. But there are exceptions to these. So we get day flying moths, and they can be the most amazing colours. And for example, skipper butterflies don't hold their wings up. They hold their wings like this. So this is a small skipper holding its wings out flat with quite a big hairy body, actually looking a little bit like a moth. But if you look at those antennae, you can see here they're narrow with these sort of clubbed ends. And here we have an elephant hawk moth, which is the most amazingly vibrant colours. So maybe we'll see some of these at our BioBlitz events that we're doing this summer, and there'll be some moth traps. So do come and join us for those, another plug. So butterfly life cycle. Here's the one that we all learn in primary school. So these are the 4 stages. You can get more than one cycle in a year, frequently 2, occasionally even 3. And various species overwinter as a different stage. So because they're insects, they're going to be happiest in the summer. They need the warmth for flying. But when it gets colder, it turns to winter. Some species, such as some of the hairstreaks, overwinter as an egg, which is quite unusual. Most species overwinter as either a caterpillar or a pupa. And then there's a few species as well, such as the comma or the peacock, who overwinter as an adult. So some of you may have seen butterflies either in the loft over winter. My parents had one on their staircase for winter, which at Christmas when we had visitors, we had to put it somewhere safe, move it. But they'll overwinter in different stages for different species. So why are they so important? And they are really, really important. They're indicators of a healthy ecosystem. They're really good at showing us how other invertebrates are doing. And the reason for that is that butterflies have quite short life cycles. So you can get multiple generations in a year. So they really rapidly respond to changes. And they also need so different things and different habitats for those different life stages. So obviously there needs to be somewhere safe that they can lay an egg. When the caterpillar comes out, it usually has one sort of food that the caterpillar eats, which may be different to what the adult will nectar feed on. So if you can go somewhere and you can see there's a healthy population of butterflies, then you can usually infer that you've got a good good range probably of other invertebrates. And of course, once you've got a really good population of invertebrates, that steps up the food chain. So you're going to have some birds, bats, hedgehogs, even badgers, you know, they live off invertebrates too. So by looking at the butterflies, you can infer what that habitat, how that ecosystem is doing. And I've put another little fact here. So blue tits, I've left that blank so you can all have a little think about how many moth caterpillars, I know it's moth butterflies, but how many moth caterpillars they might eat each year, estimated. And the answer is 50 million. So can you imagine how many caterpillars there need to be for, well, to feed the blue tits, to feed everything else that's going to eat them, and also to maintain a healthy population of those moths. So if you extrapolate that to butterflies, you can see why so many of them are, you know, in decline, because, well, caterpillars are a tasty treat for many other species, and they're, you know, they're losing out with habitat and various other pressures on them. So hopefully this evening, by learning a bit more about butterflies in the area, we might also think about what we can do to help them. So on our system, of the 59 species that we could have, we have 32 species in the conservation communities area, which are here. So butterflies in pink, moths in that sort of green colour. So where there's a moth record, that is usually a huge long list because someone puts out a moth trap and loads and loads of species come to it. Whereas the butterfly records are often more just a handful. So sometimes just even one butterfly rather than a list for that point. And looking at this map, obviously this project came about because when we looked at these parishes and we compared them to other areas across Devon, we just thought that there weren't as many records as maybe there could be. And I don't like to point the finger at specific parishes, but I'm going to. So Iddesleigh here, Hewish, and even where are we yet, Dowland, and even, you know, St Giles on the Wood is pretty big, but you've got hardly any butterfly records. They've got to be there. So I am going to appeal directly to anyone who's watching who lives in those parishes to up your game and send us in some records. We want to see more dots on this map for butterflies, and we need to try and do that this summer so that we can rewrite those parish audits and really get the numbers up. So there's your challenge for the summer. So on to the actual butterflies. Of these 59 species, they're divided into 10 families. Of those 32 species in the conservation communities area, they fall into 8 families. So I'm going to focus on 8 families in this talk. Starting with the skippers. So we've already seen that picture of the small skipper. So quite small, moth-like. Their wingspan is, for the small skipper, is only about 3 centimetres, which is what this picture is of. Quite stumpy wings, and they're not butterflies that happily sort of flitter past you as you're going for your walk. They dart just above the height of the grass, and they really sort of stay quite low. They rest with their wings flattened, as we talked about, and at night, not a word a scientist should use, but I think it's really cute. They curl their wings around what they're resting on, so they properly fold themselves in. The caterpillars need Yorkshire fog grass. So when we were talking about the different stages and the different sort of food items that the adults need to the caterpillars, often the caterpillars, for a lot of these groups of species, need grasses. And grasses are so important, not just for the caterpillars to eat. So small skippers are almost exclusively, the caterpillars only eat Yorkshire fog grass, which thankfully is quite a common grass species. But it also needs to have structure for butterflies as well, for the caterpillars to actually be safely in there and being able to hide as well as eat. So these butterflies are found in places with long grass, usually seen in late July, and they overwinter as a caterpillar. So that's why they need the Yorkshire fog can form some quite nice clumps as well. So it's perfect for overwintering. And then as things warm up, coming out and being able to eat that grass as well. So one of the larger groups, the whites, they're sort of medium to large butterflies. They are predominantly white in colour, but this also includes the sulphurs. So the brimstone is the representation of those here. And I've seen loads of brimstones this year. I was just talking to Joe before we started. Just almost every time I go out in the car and drive around, I see a beautiful flash of yellow going past. The whites often have black markings, or occasionally sort of slight colours to them as well. They overwinter as a pupa to chrysalis, and when it comes to spring and they through the summer, before they have chrysalis, their food plants are brassicas, although that can actually be caterpillars, and the adults are quite fond of them as well. So brassicas are sort of the cabbage family. There's loads of different species in there, as well as, you know, literally the cabbages that you're going to have in your allotment as well. I'm afraid these are probably the caterpillars that are on those that you wish weren't. This photo is of the large white. So both sexes have black tips to the wings. So obviously when it's folded, you can't see how dark that is, but you can see through the underwing, there's a black tip to the wing there. And then the females also have a black spot. So you can tell this one's a female. When we're asking you to do your recording, you don't need to tell us what sex the butterfly is if you're not sure. So don't worry about that at all. So quite a big butterfly, up to 7 centimetres. You get 2 generations in the summer. And for the large whites, their favourite food is the sort of cultivated brassicas. So these are really common in gardens and allotments. So they're a lovely one to see. One of my favourites, and one that we saw yesterday, Joe, I think. Me and Joe were out at a staff thing yesterday. It's the orange tip. So a bit smaller, up to 5 centimetres. But you can you see, sort of, if you ignore the orange, it's got a very similar markings to the large white that we saw. So these sort of black tips, I mean, they're black hidden under the orange, and a black dot. But it's only the males that have the orange colour. So females don't. So it makes them really similar to small whites, which are about the same size. If you're just looking at the dorsal view, so looking at the top of the wings and at their back. So these guys start coming out in April. You do get another generation late summer, that's usually a little bit briefer, but this is the key time for the orange tips. And they like crucifers like garlic, hedge mustard, cuckoo flower. So those are all generally plants that come out now, which is why this is the main time for the adults to be flying. They like damp areas, hedgerows, along woodland edges, places like that. We do have records with, well, obviously everything that I'm talking about tonight, we do have records for the conservation communities area, but the records for orange tip are a little bit dated. So we know they must be out there because they're really widespread, these butterflies. So if you see one, definitely let us know. So although the dorsal view, particularly the female, may be confused with the small white, obviously the male isn't, because it's got that gorgeous flash of orange. The underside, you can see here, is very different to the large and small white, which underneath are basically still just white, as we saw maybe with a black dot. Whereas these, they hold their wings in a very different shape. You know, they really do sort of close them together, and they've got these fantastic sort of almost, I think probably maybe making them a little bit more camouflaged markings underneath. Okay, this is the green-veined white. So this, again, from a distance, very difficult to tell from the small white. But I thought I'd put this in because it does have more pronounced markings along the veins. And if you're looking for differences like this, what I would suggest if you're going out specifically looking for butterflies is to take a pair of binoculars, which may sound a bit strange because you don't want to be seeing butterflies on the other side of a field. But if you can get ones that are quite close focusing, if you've got close focusing binoculars, then that means that you can get quite close to the butterfly, but not so close that you're going to disturb it. Because particularly the whites, when they start flying, it's almost impossible to tell which one they are, unless you do lots and lots of butterfly surveys. So by taking out binoculars, you can actually focus when they're at rest, and you can see features like this, which you wouldn't see if you were just going for a walk and they were flying past. There is another butterfly that is white, that's got sort of veins and darker markings underneath, and that's the marbled white, which is actually quite different and belongs to a whole different family, part of the Browns family, which we'll come on to next. But I'll show you a photo of those and see that in reality they're actually very different. But again, this white butterfly, the green veined white, again favours those sort of slightly damper areas like the orange tip did, so around ponds and ditches and damp meadows, and it likes the same sort of food stuff. And again, because it's one of the white family, overwinters as a chrysalis. So onto the browns. This is one of our largest families, small to medium size, all roughly brown colour, apart from the marbled white, which is black and white and doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the group. And they usually have a black eye spot on their forewings, and then various species have different eye spots, maybe kind of along the bottom of the hind wings, and frequently these dots are sort of, they're black with a white centre to them. And they all have larval food plants that are grasses. So these are really the family of butterflies that you see flitting around the meadows. And the first one, which I can almost guarantee that if you go to a meadow on a nice day in summer, you should see this one. It's the meadow brown. Its wingspan is 5.5 centimetres, so it's not huge, but it's not small. It's brown. It's got a really sort of characteristic eye spot here, so just one on each side, and then usually nothing here. And then a bit of orange on the wings, and the females are more orange than the males. So really common flying over meadows, and you can see dozens of them on a good day in a good field, which is amazing. They'll fly on quite dull days as well. So some butterflies are quite picky with how much sunshine they need, to the point where a cloud comes over and all the butterflies disappear. And then the cloud moves away, the sun comes out, and suddenly there's butterflies again. Meadow browns aren't that fussy. They'll quite happily carry on flying even when it's a little bit cloudy, as long as it's nice and warm. It'll overwinter as a caterpillar, and it flies sort of throughout the summer, July and August. It eats, it prefers narrow blade grasses, so kind of like fescues, but it will also, the caterpillar will also eat the sort of wider ones. So for example, cocksfoot, which is got a reasonably wide blade grass. There is another species that's reasonably similar, which I've always called the gatekeeper, but is also known as the hedge brown. And it's similar, but it's more orange, and it sometimes has eye spots along here as well. And when I say more orange, it really is quite orange on both the fore and hind wings. So the meadow brown is seen quite regularly in the conservation communities area, as it should be. But that's one that if you actually go and keep your eyes open for butterflies in the summer, you will almost certainly see one of these on a good day. This is a ringlet, so Joe and I were talking about these as well before we started. They don't come out until kind of July, late July. So they are, I mean, they're properly brown, aren't they, these ones? And they've got a row of rings that come all the way around here. And on the underside as well, they've got these spots as well. But the number of spots can vary between butterflies, and particularly between different populations. So in one area, they might have more rings or larger rings than in another area. They're similar size again to the meadow brown, just slightly smaller, about 5 centimetres. And the adults feed on bramble and wild privet. So the areas where I've usually seen them is somewhere that's got quite a bit of scrub, might have some bracken, sort of that kind of area. The caterpillar likes those coarse grasses. So the cocksfoot, as we said, maybe false brome. So those slightly sort of scrubbier places is probably where you need to look for ringlets. Again, overwintering as a caterpillar, so those nice thick tussocks of grass are where it's going to be hanging out for those months. And with the conservation communities area, it's seen quite regularly and quite a wide distribution as well, which is what we'd expect. So this is the marbled white. So like I said, it's the one in the family that doesn't really fit. But if you look, although it's got all these markings on the veins, like the green veined white did, it's a little bit larger, and you can see it's got the eye spots that that's quite typical of butterflies in the brown family. So it's got eye spots underneath, and it has some a couple on the top. And if you can see, all these sort of cells on the wings are outlined. And when that butterfly opens its wings, if you look at the top, then those cells are again marked. Some of them are black, some of them are white, and it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful butterfly. Thought I had someone's cat then. So it needs, again, narrow-bladed grasses typically, so it really likes red fescue for the caterpillars, and it likes long grasses as well. So yeah, so these sort of long grass meadows, and it was last seen in our records at Meath. So that is, yeah, lots of lovely meadows there. If you remember the map, Meath and Holston, being Devon Wildlife Trust reserves, sort of have the lion's share of a lot of the records in the conservation communities area. So although of course I love to see records coming in from those places, it'd be great to expand out. So sort of, yeah, for everywhere else as well. So I'm going to move on to the blues now. So there's 2 species from the blue family that are found in our 11 parishes. Blues are usually quite small butterflies, and they prefer quite open grassland. I often see them flitting kind of along the pathways quite low. You get that sort of gorgeous flash of blue. Their food plants are usually the grassland wildflowers, so birdsfoot trefoil, clovers, things like that that might grow slightly shorter, so not the sort of huge long tussocky grass. And that's where you'll often see them around there. So this is the common blue, the picture here. Quite small, so only about 3.5 centimetres. You get 2 generations in a year. So there'll be, do you know, I think I've actually seen one a couple of weeks ago already, because we've had this lovely warm spell. But usually they don't come out until May into June, and then late summer as well. And these overwinter as a caterpillar. And not all blue butterflies are actually blue, and that's because there's a difference between the sexes. So this one here is a male common blue, so it is really lovely bright blue colour. It's got what's really typical of lots of the blue butterflies is to have sort of white outer edge to the wing, and then a little black line just within that, and then you get the the colour. Here is a female common blue. So you get, again, colour differences with different populations, and in the south where we are, they tend to be a lot more browner than other populations. And the females are a lot more elusive. Now, whether that's just because they're not as bright, or often it's to do with behaviour as well. The males of a lot of the species are sort of out and advertising a little bit more, so they're more conspicuous. So they're really blue on top, but underneath, on the underside of their wings, they're sort of white and orange. So if you can imagine where these sort of orange patches are on this female common blue, if she folded her wings up, you'd have corresponding orange patches underneath, and then a sort of mottled wing underneath with quite distinctive black and white eye spots again, which you sort of almost get on the top here. So our other species that we've got in the conservation communities area is the holly blue, which from the top is quite similar, particularly the males. So they've got a thin black edge to their wings, like the common blue males do. The females are still blue, and they've got a really thick black edge to the top of their forewings. So if you see a blue butterfly with a really sort of fat black edge to their wings, they've still got the white right round the edge, then that might well be a female holly blue. A good way of telling them apart is actually when they close their wings. So they're blue on top, but whereas the common blue have got these orange patches, the holly blue is quite pale with a few sort of speckles. And these come out from now, and they're quite a common garden visitor as well. And the holly blue, I think it probably gets its name because I think it's the spring generation that eats, oh, I might have got it the wrong way around. One generation eats holly and the other generation eats ivy. So it's a very sort of Christmas themed butterfly. There's only one species representing the coppers, which is the small copper. So it's small like the blues. And this is the one that can have 3 generations in a summer between May and October. And then they overwinter as a caterpillar. They're usually found on sort of unimproved grassland and moorland. And they like dry, warm conditions, which is pretty much the same for all well, some of them like sort of damper areas. The small coppers like sorrel and dock. So again, they're ones that you're going to find around those slightly scrubby areas that you know, in a garden would be the untended section, which actually so many butterflies really like. We've got a few records of these, but they're mostly from the northern parishes within our project area. So hairstreaks. Hairstreaks are a group that I've been, well, particularly one species that I've been working with quite a lot over the last couple of years. This is a green hairstreak, this picture, and it's a really, really beautiful butterfly, quite small, sometimes like less than 3 centimetres across. And these species prefer often a sort of more woody habitat. The larval food plants for some of them are trees, whereas the green hairstreak prefers moorland. So it likes gorse, broom, bramble, all used as the caterpillar food plants. You do actually get them on chalk grassland as well, green hairstreaks, where they obviously a very different type of group of plants, but we don't have very much chalk grasslands in Devon, and particularly in the conservation communities area, so we don't need to worry about that this evening. So they'll be out from now for the next couple of months, and both sexes look quite similar. Now the hairstreaks usually get their name because they have a sort of a white line that comes across here. In the green hairstreak, this has been reduced quite often to just a couple of dots. So these are all that remain from the streak that is usually why the other species have its name. And this one overwinters a chrysalis, which is different from the other hairstreaks that I'm going to talk about in a second. Very few records of green hairstreak. Most recently, it was actually seen in someone's garden rather than out on some moorland. So this is a species that I am very familiar with, brown hairstreak. So you can see in this one, that white line is really pronounced. So a little bit larger, only about 4 centimetres. The upper wings are dark brown with a kind of flash of orange. So it's this underside that's the most distinctive. Now the adults are quite difficult to see because they live right at the top of ash trees, and they congregate up at the top of mast trees. So sort of one tree that stands out to them. So they all go and congregate there, and they feed on aphid honeydew. Occasionally they do come down and feed on other plants like hemp agrimony and the wonderful bramble, but most of the time they're up there. At the end of summer, if you're really lucky, you might see the females coming down to lay their eggs, because they lay their eggs on blackthorn. And that is where those eggs spend the winter. So the brown hairstreak and the purple hairstreak as well are both quite unusual in that they overwinter as eggs. Now, the brown hairstreak has declined by half since the 1970s. So in the 1970s is kind of used as the benchmark for where our populations of many species, so butterflies and birds in particular, and how they're doing compared to that benchmark. What we have to remember is that in the 1970s, that wasn't perfect in terms of their population. So that was already probably a declining population, but that is what we have to compare everything to. So this species has declined by about half since then, and that's according to Butterfly Conservation, who are the authorities on butterfly populations. And this is one of the eggs on blackthorn. So yeah, there it is, tiny little thing. It's only about 0.8 of a millimetre across. Over the last couple of winters, I've been running with a different project some surveys looking for these, and the looks that people give me when I tell them we're looking in a hedge for something that is less than a millimetre across, they all think I'm completely mad. But it is possible to get your eye in and to find them. But they are suffering, and some of that is because of hedgerow management. So these butterflies like to lay their eggs on growth that is only 1 or 2 years old. So if you can imagine female butterfly comes down at the end of summer, lays her eggs, and then at the start of autumn, someone comes along with a flailer and flails all that growth off, and those eggs are pretty much done for. Then they're on the ground. But any that do survive, they'll do it again, and they'll come back the next year. And if a flailer comes along that year as well, then that's very rapidly, that population is going to go downhill. So what we generally advise is, if you have any blackthorn hedges, if you're lucky enough to own any land, then to have a sort of sympathetic regime of cutting. So maybe only some of your hedges and on a 3-year cycle or so. So we do have records of brown hairstreaks from within the conservation communities area from this past winter. So just in the last few months, we've got, oh, I've got a little bit more of a close-up here of an egg. They're absolutely gorgeous. You might tell I'm a little bit obsessed with this butterfly. So we know they are there, and although we've missed this winter, if we can encourage anyone to look next winter, probably too late for our audits, but it'd be fantastic to know if there are more of them out there. The purple hairstreak also overwinters as an egg. It looks different to this one. and it overwinters in the tips of amongst the buds of oak twigs. So different tree species, and right on the edge amongst the buds. And those adults are sort of black with a bluish purple flash on the upper wing, which is more pronounced in the males than the females. But they haven't been recorded in the conservation communities for quite a long time. So I know we're thinking quite far ahead to next winter, but if anyone fancies taking on that challenge and having a look for them, then I'd love to know if you find any, because it really has been quite a long time since they were seen in the area. On to our next family, and these are the Fritillaries, which are all absolutely gorgeous in my view. Medium to large and quite powerful flyers. They all tend to be a sort of orangey golden colour on the upper wings, and for most of them, their larval food plant, so what the caterpillars eat, are violets. So a lot of them will be out, well, there'll be caterpillars now, because I've seen fantastic carpets of violets in the last few weeks. The marsh fritillary is different. So that one has a larval food plant of devil's bit scabious. So that's a plant of unimproved meadows and damp areas, which that habitat is hugely declining. And so the marsh fritillary really is in some trouble. This picture here is of a small pearl bordered fritillary. So up to about 4.5 centimetres wide. So not one of the largest ones. The underside is well, just as beautiful really, with white patches. And the larval food plant includes common dog violet and marsh violets. These ones overwinter as a caterpillar. And as with many of the fritillaries, they're found in kind of woodland glades, clearings. But all our records are really quite historic for this area. This one here has, so since that 1970s benchmark, butterfly conservation has been keeping an eye on it, and it has declined by 76%. So it's no wonder we're not seeing very many of them, but it would be so nice to see them. But that's not as bad. So the high brown fritillary hasn't been seen in the parishes since the 80s, and I have to say that I don't hold out a huge amount of hope, because since the 70s it's declined by 96%. So only found now in a handful of sites, this one, the high brown fritillary, but a handful of sites, and that's across the UK, but we're really lucky that half of those sites are in Devon. So we're sort of its last hope really. And also they're near the conservation communities area. So if you see one, you'll have to include a photo, but we'd be very excited to receive any records for high brown fritillaries. Here's a marsh fritillary, also very old records for the conservation communities area. A little bit more brightly patterned than the others, so we've got a variation in the lovely orange colours. Another one that's declined, sorry, it feels like a bit of bad news here, nearly 80% since the 1970s. As I said, caterpillars feed on devil's bit scabious, and so that can be one of the reasons it's declining, is that habitat loss of those sort of damp meadows. Really, you know, we just don't have very many of those left anymore. However, there is one species, the silver wash fritillary, which is one that is, I don't want to say common, because it's not quite common, but you'll see it around woodlands. It's really big. It's 7.5 centimetres across, really orange, big black spots and markings, and quite a dull underwing. But you can see these in gardens as well. They'll come to gardens. Amazing butterflies, and they've actually gone up since the 1970s in number. Hooray! So there's a little bit of good news to end the fritillary section on. So here, I'm afraid I've just had to call this group other. There's a variety of gorgeous butterflies in this family. check how we're doing for time. I'm gonna race through this one, I'm afraid. So medium to large, quite strong flyers. This is the family that includes some of our migrant butterflies. So they overwinter, as I think I said at the beginning, kind of in Africa and Asia. This one here is a painted lady, and that is one of our sort of probably best known migrant butterflies. So 5.5 centimetres across, often seen sort of early in the summer, and then can be really late, that sort of hangs around before it heads back to North Africa. I mean, it's just amazing that an insect like this can travel so far. Here we've got a peacock. I'm sure everyone is familiar with these. Overwinters as an adult, so this is one that occasionally you do get in lofts or on stairways. Very cryptic underwing, so really brown, mottled, helps it to camouflage over winter when it rests with its wings up over winter. This one's nearly 7 centimetres across. The caterpillars like nettles. You can see it here on ragwort. So remember all those sort of nettles and ragworts and things you don't necessarily want in your garden, but are so good for butterflies. And this one's quite frequently seen in conservation communities area, probably because it's so distinctive, everyone recognises it. My last butterfly, another migrant, so over 7 centimetres, the red admiral. Now with climate change, they're actually thinking that some of them are overwintering in the south of the UK. So it doesn't get cold enough anymore for them to have to head back down south across the channel. So we're seeing effects of climate change on where these butterflies are spending their year. Again, caterpillars eat nettles, and these ones are seen quite frequently. So recording butterflies. We've got the conservation communities recording form on the website, and if you go to the DBRC website, we've got a lovely page that you can just input all the information you need to on there to send us in your records. There are various schemes for recording butterflies. So for example, the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme, where you walk a transect every week over the majority of the summer. And Butterfly Conservation does the Big Butterfly Count in July, which is just over one weekend. Or you can just do your own survey, either go for a walk or just sit down, with your binoculars for a few minutes and just see what you can spot on a lovely day. So even if you're out walking the dog and you see a butterfly, make a note and let us know. We want to see that map with a lot more of those pink dots on it, please. So what's the future? The last state of the UK's butterflies that Butterfly Conservation produces was a while ago, so I expect there'll be another one not too long. And it shows that almost everything's been declining, really the vast majority. There'll be effects from climate change. So there are some that in Britain will win, so in numbers. So comma and speckled wood have been increasing their range and heading further north. But we have to remember that we're in the north of the range, so perhaps the populations in the south of the range are not doing so well with it heating up. And then in this country, the real losers are those who do better at altitude. And as that altitude gets warmer and warmer, for example, there's a mountain ringlet, which we don't get in Devon. It really does live up north and in Scotland. That one's going to be pushed, and it's got absolutely nowhere to go. So a bit worrying. So how can you help? Send us in your records. Always good to know where they are now. Leave grasses long over winter. Look into hedgerow management. Plant butterfly friendly flowers, a lovely variety to really tempt them into your gardens. Of course, don't use any herbicides or pesticides. And really just remember the different stages that a butterfly needs to go through. So leaving some tussocky rough grass as well for wintering. We've got some fantastic resources on the Devon Wildlife site, Devon Wildlife Trust website, and our YouTube channel. We've had people who are way more expert than me give us some fantastic talks. And of course, there's butterfly conservation as well. And you can download this fantastic little booklet on wildlife gardening. So thank you very much. Hopefully I've left a bit of time for some questions. But thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing, see if everyone's still here.
Thank you, Jess. That was brilliant. So much information. I'm going to definitely have to watch that again once we release the recording.
Overloaded everyone with information. Just butterflies are great, aren't they? They're just great.
Yeah, great. And it's interesting to link them to the habitat and those food plants, because that puts it in perspective, doesn't it? Quite a lot of grassland management, you say go and cut it in the autumn and clear it, then that's not going to help with butterflies. So you always have to leave some, you almost need a rotation, don't you? What you
to leave some, or to if you cut quite long, so that you're not disturbing, you know, because the caterpillars really are, they're going to be trying to get as much cover as they can, so they're going to be right at the base.
We've got a question here that's come in. It says, are there any records of the dark green frits? As I saw some in Torrington last year, and I have a photo too.
Oh, send it in.
Yeah, I'd say send that in. That's
Please
amazing, isn't it? Yeah, and we're trying to get records for the Torrington area, so that would be brilliant.
So all the species that were in those families, there are, in some of those families there are more species, but they're just not on our records for having been in the conservation communities area. So if you can add to any of those, then please do let us know. Yeah, we'd love them, love those records.